Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with part 2 of our webinar series on using the new Eureka Remediation tools. My name is Julia Davis. I work for the Achievement Network, and we've partnered with LDOE to present these 2 webinars to roll out these new tools and how you can use them in your classroom. To get started today, there is a warm-up question on the screen. If you would please share in the chat box your responses to these questions. So how long is your math block at your school? And how does remediation and intervention happen, either in your classroom or in your school? And I imagine we're going to hear things about small groups or centers or separate intervention times in those responses. So we'll take a few minutes to answer those in the chat. Thanks so much for sharing those responses in the chat. It's great to get a sense of who's on the phone and the type of classroom environments that you have and how much time we have to work with, because I know that's one of the main challenges that can be in front of teachers. Even though this is a great new helpful tool, brainstorming how to use this and during what time is going to be our main point of conversation today. If you were on the webinar yesterday, these objectives will look familiar to you. So over the 2-part webinar series, we've been learning how the LDOE Eureka Remediation tools can help you diagnose critical foundational skills and plan how and when to address unfinished learning. Yesterday, we had an overview of the tools, we practiced analyzing student work, and we identified the remediation materials. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the remediation materials to actually select the ones we would use, and then talk about when the remediation will occur within the module and within our school schedule, and then we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. Here's our agenda for today. We'll start with a quick recap of yesterday's content in case there's some people joining us today who weren't able to attend yesterday. And then we'll be doing lots of practice to identify the remediation lessons and talk about when these might occur. So again, this is a new resource from LDOE, the Eureka Remediation tools. They're available for prioritized topics in grades 4 through 8 and Algebra 1. As you saw yesterday, they include 3 diagnostic questions for each standard that are foundational skills for new content. And they can point teachers to portions of prior grade level Eureka lessons that can be used to target the unfinished learning. So that way students are using materials that are aligned to the types of strategies they learned before and to the strategies that we want them using in the current grade level. And they're designed to be used within your core math class intervention time that can include RTI or a combination of the 2. Yesterday we looked at the introduction and it showed us all the tools that are going to be created this year. So again, since these are for prioritized topics, we don't see one for every single module or every single topic, but the LDOE selected the topics that had the most critical foundational skills and ones they'd heard from teachers that students usually struggled with. And so we have a diagnostic and remediation to help us with those. And these are found on the Louisiana Believes website under the K-12 Math Planning Resources in the section Eureka Remediation Tools. And today we're going to be looking at the same tool we looked at yesterday, the Grade 5 Module 2 Topic B, and that is loaded into the webinar. So if you want to go ahead and open up that resource, we will be using that in just a minute to continue our practice that we started yesterday. When you look at Grade 5, Module 2, Topic B, you're looking at a screen that looks similar to mine. And yesterday when we analyzed this, we found that the skills and knowledge covered in this topic were around the foundation for the distributive property and how the connections between the area model and the standard algorithm for multiplication. We talked about the prerequisite skills or the foundational skills that students would need, and those included basic facts, addition, multi-digit multiplication, and multiplication strategies such as the area model. Yesterday we scored student work and we sorted students into groups based on the diagnostic criteria. So we found that in our sample of 6 students, there were 2 students who did not pass Part B, which was related to addition, and 2 students who did not pass Part C, related to using strategies to solve multiplication problems. So here's where our work today picks up. So if you will turn in Grade 5, Module 2, Topic B, to the Part B remediation guidance, I'd like you to read to yourself Part B and Part C. This is located on page 6 and 7 of the Module 2, Topic B diagnostic tool. So let's take a minute to read those 2 pages to ourselves, and then we'll start our practice for today. So as you saw in your reading, each page of the remediation guidance is set up in the same way. It includes the full text of the prior grade level standards, so in this case, 2 4th grade standards that relate to the 5th grade work in this module. It gives a brief summary of why this is important for current grade level work, so we understand why is this on the diagnostic, why do my students need to be solid in these skills to enter into the module. And then it provides some information about the diagnostic assessment, such as common errors we might see from students, which can give us some information for grouping, and even some suggestions about what we might do to help remediate students. And then in the blue section, it links to the remediation resource we can use. So that's the part that was most exciting to me, because I feel like that can take so much time as a teacher looking for the right materials to use with students. But this takes you right to a prior grade level Engaged New York lesson, which for most of us that means it's a lesson our students saw last year, so it should be familiar to them, it should use models that they're already familiar with, and can be a great starting point to fill in that unfinished learning we've identified. So today we are going to practice with the students in Part B. So we had 2 students that did not pass the addition portion of the diagnostic, and the linked lesson is a 4th grade lesson from Module 1, Topic D, Lesson 11. And the guidance given to us is that we should use the concept development portion of the lesson and a sampling of problems from the problem set focused on procedural skill and fluency. So it's really directive for us. Use this lesson. Don't use the whole thing because, again, time is such an issue, but use these certain portions that they've called out. If you click that hyperlink, it would take you to the Engaged New York website, and you would be able to click on the lesson that they'd called out. I have also uploaded this into the webinar, and so if you can grab that, you can go ahead and click on Grade 4, Lesson 11, and download that. And this is where we're going to do some practice together. So I'd like you to skim that lesson and decide which problems you would use if you were the teacher remediating this group of students. And I've put the remediation guidance on the screen so you can reference it. So again, they've advised us to use the concept development and a sampling of problems. So let's take about 5 minutes to look through the lesson and do that on our own. And when you're ready, we're going to start sharing in the chat which problems would you use and why, and any other thoughts related to the portions of the lesson that you would choose for remediating Part B. If you have any questions, please share those in the chat, and we'll make sure that everyone gets set with where they need to go. So many really great thoughts shared in the chat box. One thing I think is exciting is it didn't take us a ton of time to look through this lesson and select what we would use. Again, I'm thinking about like it took us immediately to the materials that would be good to use with students in this instance. When I was looking through, the ones that I'd chosen were similar to some of the comments that I saw in the chat. So for the concept development, I would use problems 1, 2, and 3. For many of the reasons that you all called out as well. It worked on renaming different units. It made the connection for students between tape diagrams, place value disks, and the standard algorithm, which using those multiple models can be so helpful for students to understand what is happening and understand the concept that lies behind this procedure. I would not use problem 4 because it is a word problem. And if we think about the guidance that was given here, they want us to choose problems focused on procedural skill and fluency. And since word problems are more application, I didn't choose to use that problem from the concept development. The same is true for the problem set. I think many of those problems in different combinations could work. I chose just a sampling. I think I saw someone say every other problem. I think that's a fine way to do it. When I was looking through, you just want a mix of problems that involve renaming and problems that don't. I would include one of the problems that ask students to align from the horizontal to the vertical. But again, I wouldn't choose the word problems because if I'm thinking about this module is focused on multiplication, and the addition work students are going to have to do is just going to be within that multiplication problem solving. It won't involve an addition word problem context. So that may be a skill your students need remediation on. That might happen at another time, or if you already know that, you might choose to do it, but it's not a critical foundational skill to enter into this module, this topic. So again, if we're tight on time and we have to prioritize, that would be the way that I would prioritize and focus just on the algorithm because it's related to the procedural skill and fluency. I'm going to pause there for just a few seconds to make sure if there are any questions that come through the chat about how we made those decisions about what to choose and why. All right. So moving along, at this point we have diagnosed students and we've separated them into groups based on the unfinished learning that we've identified. And we've chosen our remediation materials and we've thought about how to prioritize even within those to have a really efficient, effective lesson to fill in the gaps that we notice. Now we need to think about another timing piece. So when is this happening within our unit plan, within this module, and when is this happening within our school day? And we know there's no easy answer to this, and it's going to look different in a lot of different school contexts, but I'm going to present some ideas and some best practices that can hopefully spark ideas for you at your school. When I'm thinking about timing within the module, the main question is whether the unfinished learning needs to be addressed before we start the module at all, or if it can be filled in as we're teaching the grade level content. So let's look at that within this example. On the screen, you'll see a screenshot of the lessons in Topics A and Topics B of Module 2 from Grade 5. And then I just put, again, to remind us about the unfinished learning that was identified in the diagnostic. So if I'm thinking about those students that did not pass Part B and they needed addition work and we just chose the problems we would use with them, when I'm looking at the table of contents, I'm trying to think, like, where am I going to do this? What lesson is it really critical that these students have addition so that they're successful with my grade level content? So I'm looking at Topic B because the diagnostic was for Topic B. And I'm looking at Lesson 3. So Lesson 3 asks students to write and interpret numerical expressions. Lesson 4, convert numerical expressions using mental strategies. And then in 5 is where I start to see them using the models and distributive property connected to the standard algorithm. So I know I need addition by the time I get to Lesson 5 with the standard algorithm. And my hunch is that students are going to be okay if they don't have addition within Lesson 3 and 4. And so if I have a longer math block, I could pull small groups during Lessons 3 and 4 and work with those students before I get to Lesson 5, and then my class is ready to be successful. So in this case, I could do that work alongside the grade level content within this topic, or I could do it before we start Topic B at all. And I'd want to go check that by looking at Lessons 3 and 4 specifically and making sure that my hunch was correct. But I have done to do that, and it would work out that way. So that's the way I would go about thinking about this. If we know the diagnostic is for Topic B, you can just look at the lessons and think, okay, are those skills, which lesson requires those skills? And then we'll know when we need to remediate students to make sure they're ready for the grade level content. The other resource that I wanted to highlight to make sure that everyone's aware of it are the Louisiana Eureka guides. And the reason I'm talking about these now is this can be another place to see where we could build in time to remediate for our students. And so on the K-12 Math Year-Long Planning Resources, there is a section, Louisiana Eureka Guides, and I have uploaded the Grade 5 guide into the webinar. So if you'll open that now, it's called Grade 5 Guide to Implementing Eureka. And you can scroll to page 3 to see a table that looks like mine. So LDOE has made a sample calendar for every single grade level about how the modules might be paced out. And I'm going to talk about how we could use that. Then I'm going to give you a second to pull up that document and find the page that looks like mine. And if you can type got it or I'm there or something similar into the chat when your page looks like mine, so I know that we're ready to move on and everyone's looking at the right part. Oh, y'all are so quick. Okay, so if we're looking at the sample calendar, you can see that I've highlighted a few flex days that are on the calendar. So again, this is Module 2 we're talking about. And so we see on the screen Module 2, Lesson 1, Topic A is how that coding works. And then there's a built-in flex day, and we skip to Lesson 3, Topic B, Lesson 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then we've jumped to Lesson 10, 11, 12. There's another flex day built in the following week when we've skipped over a few lessons between 16 and 19. And if you scroll down a few pages, you'll see the reason that these lessons are skipped. So the Department of Education has coded the lessons in Eureka for us. They use the term R for remediation lessons, so lessons that are aligned to prior grade level standards. O if the lesson is on grade level and addresses the grade level content. And E indicates lessons that are actually above the expectation of the grade level standard. So when they've built these calendars, they're recommending that you skip the lessons that are coded as enrichment lessons, and that can provide you some flex days that can give you time to do this remediation if you need to take a whole day to work with your class, or it can be an opportunity where the portion of your class that doesn't need the remediation could do an enrichment task or another type of activity that reinforces their grade level content and would give you time to pull a small group that did need remediation. I'm going to pause for a minute for you to review that document and share any questions you have in the chat about how to use that. All right, so those would be my two main recommendations for helping teachers make these decisions about when within your unit plan can remediation occur. One, review the table of contents and then look at the lessons to decide which lesson is that foundational skill really critical for, and that can help you know when to build in the remediation. And then secondly, make sure you're using those guides to implementing Eureka that can provide you knowledge of when you might have a flex day or which lessons might actually be above the expectations of the grade level, and you could remove them to give you back a little bit of instructional time. Now let's talk about when within our school day this might happen. So it looks like on the warm-up I saw people sharing a lot of different school contexts, some people that have RTI time every day for students, other people that seem to have a very long math block that you could probably do some small groups or centers within that time. And so again, the tools are designed to be used whole group or small group. So if you're a grade level teacher, you could give these to your whole class and pull students into small groups or stations, or you could coordinate with the RTI or intervention teachers to give diagnostics to a small group of students. Or if you had the data, you could share with them, hey, I know you see these students for 30 minutes. Could you work on these skills that I've identified? And those are going to be important for the next module and starting in a few weeks. I've created 3 scenarios of common school structures and how this remediation might work. So if you'll open this document in the webinar, it's titled Timing Scenarios, Unfinished Learning. I'm going to take a few minutes to read that, and then let's share comments in the chat about which pieces might apply to your school context. And if you haven't already, go ahead and share in the chat if there are any new ideas that got sparked for you based on reading those, or if one matches how you might use these within your school structure. And take this time too, if you do have questions, if you're feeling, that your schedule doesn't allow time for this, share those questions in the chat, because this is a time for us all to collaborate and share ideas too to help make sure we do have time to use these well. Thanks so much for the conversation coming through the chat. Please keep sharing questions or comments, and we'll keep responding to those as they come in. I want to move forward to talk about intervention time in general. So this could be in your classroom if you're pulling small groups of students to do intervention. This could apply to sharing with RTI teachers. I saw some people on the webinar are RTI teachers themselves. Thinking about maximizing intervention time, this is such a powerful time for students, but oftentimes it doesn't seem to get the results that for the amount of time and effort that we're putting in. And so these are the best practices we feel like that really ensure this time is maximized and most effective for students. The first of all is that intervention should be focused on standards aligned work, even if that's below grade level standards. So we want to make sure that any time we're doing intervention with students, we're clear on what we're doing, which standard it applies to, and why we've chosen that standard. Using these new Eureka diagnostic tools can make it so clear about we're choosing this foundational skill because it directly connects to the grade level work, and it's helping students be successful right now on their grade level content in class. It's also best if there is a regular system for communication on lesson plans and data between the core math teacher and the intervention teachers. We want to be able to know if the intervention is working, if it's helping students be more successful, and if not, we need to make a change to make sure that it is having that impact for them. We often see that intervention teachers can really benefit from having the plans of the core math teacher in advance to be able to modify, to know the same strategies and methods that the core math teacher is using so they can reinforce those in their small group. Many schools are using an off-the-shelf intervention program, whether that's in a book or on a computer format, and those can be really effective, but we do recommend that there is a process to assess the quality, alignment, and effectiveness of those programs. So we want to make sure, again, that whatever materials we're putting in front of students, we're looking at some sort of data regularly to make sure they're having the impact we intend. And the last recommendation we make is that intervention teachers are included in Math PD. So I know in some school structures there might be a block in the morning where it's like an all-hands-on-deck approach to math intervention. Particularly we see this sometimes before the LEAP test. And we can have PE teachers or ELA teachers teaching math to different groups of students. And I think we all know as math teachers it's really difficult to teach math, and some of the models that are being used in our new standards are ones we weren't taught when we were students, and we're having to do a lot of learning ourselves. And so we want to make sure that anyone that's responsible for math instruction for our students, particularly those students that are struggling, has been trained and involved in any professional development. The last document we're going to look at today is loaded into the webinar as well, and it's called Recommendations for Targeted Math Instruction, I believe. And so it's going to provide a list of common missteps that can sometimes be found in intervention and a recommendation for how to fix that misstep. And this is a document that ANET's created in combination with Student Achievement Partners. So I'd like you to take a few minutes to read over the document and reflect to yourself which one or two are the ones that you might want to take back to your school and consider with your team. Maybe a misstep that you've seen or you have a hypothesis might be there, and consider taking this recommendation to fix it. So we'll take a few minutes to look over that document now. And after you've read, if you can share the misstep that stuck out to you or a reflection that you're having based on the recommendation you might try to take back to improve intervention at your school. Great reflection coming through the chat about trying to address every gap. This is a really common one. It's so hard, and definitely a place where I think the diagnostics can really help because they've already narrowed down for us the foundational skills that are connected to the grade level material. So hopefully that can be something that we can all take back to our schools. So many of these that we saw are connected to our new Eureka Remediation tools. So if I think about the recommendation to provide just-in-time support, the fact that these diagnostics are by module and by topic can provide remediation for students in a really timely manner so that we're remediating right before they need it and helping them be successful in grade level material, as opposed to doing, fourth grade review for 2 weeks at the beginning of the year and then students don't actually remember it by November when they need it for module 3. We touched on prioritizing. I agree that's such a common one and it's hard. We want to address every gap, but we can't, since we've already said, for timing reasons. So we need to prioritize, and this can help us do that. And the last one that I'm really excited about is about the aspect of rigor. So oftentimes it is common that we see intervention being taught in a step-by-step procedural way. The fact that the Eureka diagnostic tools connect to a prior grade level lesson will ensure that the remediation materials are the right aspect of rigor. So if what's needed is a conceptual understanding to fill in that foundational gap that we see, the materials will target the conceptual understanding. And it takes some of our work to actually find those materials ourselves by being linked right there to a prior grade level lesson. So again, this is the process that we've been walking through over the past 2 diagnostics. We diagnosed using the embedded diagnostic. Some of the diagnostics are very short. Some are in the mid-range, which is how I would describe this one that we've been working with this week. And some are more lengthy, particularly as you get into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. The diagnostics can get rather long. And so they could be split up across a series of days. I can see potentially putting 3 questions on a series of exit tickets a few days in a row so that you don't feel like you're sacrificing a lot of instructional time to collect the diagnostic information. Then you're determining what gaps exist and whether they're for the whole class or a small group. You're doing some work to understand how that prerequisite standard relates to the new content and when it needs to be addressed before the module begins or during the module before you get to a certain lesson. And then you're taking action. Potentially you're doing a whole class lesson by using one of the flex days, given that guidance in the guide to implementing Eureka, or maybe you're taking action with a small group of students, either in centers in your classroom or during an RTI time or other intervention block. At this point, I do want to pause for any additional Q&A. So on the screen are just a few questions that did come in between the last webinar and this one. So one was what I just touched on in terms of when to administer the diagnostics. So I do think one option, our goal here is to collect the diagnostic information but not take up a lot of precious instructional time. So one method is what I shared related to the exit tickets. So adding in a section to each exit ticket and telling students it's diagnostic. Collecting the information that way. Other teachers have suggested using these as bell ringers and letting students know like they are diagnostic, but repurposing your do now or bell ringer one day to collect this information. Adding it to a weekly quiz or test as a separate diagnostic portion would be another recommendation. Who should use the resource? We definitely feel like these are beneficial to grade level, special education, RTI teachers, all of the above. And I know that LDOE is really interested in learning from all different kinds of teachers how they're using the resource and what they're finding valuable. And the third question that I know, a few people are wondering materials from these webinars. So everything's loaded into the chat. And in just a second, I'll put the PowerPoint in there as well, so you can download that if you are someone that's going to redeliver this information at your campus. And the webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the LDOE YouTube channel as well, so that you can rewatch or share with colleagues who'd like to watch the material. I'll pause. I'll upload the PowerPoint into the webinar and also monitor the chat. So let's share any additional questions in the Q&A before we wrap up for the day. That's a great question about, so the question is math intervention. Some parishes have a list of intervention products that are on the approved list to use, and do we see these materials becoming official interventions? I think that's a great question. I would imagine so. But I'm going to pass that on to LDOE because that's something they could potentially work on as well. So great question about that. As we wrap up for the day, please share any additional questions that you'd like us to follow up on. And before you leave, please share just how do you plan to use the Eureka remediation tools at your school. So that could be in your own classroom or that could be with colleagues. And my contact information is on the screen as well. And you're welcome to email me with any additional follow-ups or if you need any of the materials. Another question, will the tools be available for lower grades? So that's right, this year they're only available for grades 4 through 8 in Algebra 1. LDOE has said that, if these are responded to well by teachers and the teachers feel like they're useful, they would like to expand them. But they're using this as kind of a research year to hear from teachers about how valuable they are before they would expand to lower grades. So I would definitely continue to pass on your feedback to your school leaders so they can advocate for lower grades if you feel like they are really beneficial. Thanks so much everyone for joining. I will stay on the chat for a few more minutes to make sure if there's any additional questions that come in, and you're welcome to follow up with me afterwards. Good luck with your students this year. I hope you find this resource really helpful, and thanks so much for your participation today.
This has been a presentation of the Louisiana Department of Education, copyright 2017, all rights reserved. For more information or to contact the Louisiana Department of Education on the web, go to www.louisianabelieves.com or call 1-877-453-2721.